Cool. So yeah, this is a new podcast I'm doing, just an idea I had.
Okay.
Just I thought I knew a lot of people who just are involved with mysticism and like on the edge of it and the unknown and kind of coming back from the unknown and trying to make sense of it. And I know you do work with people coming off of trips and trying to make sense of their visions and all that. But I guess first I just wanted to, can you just kind of introduce yourself and explain the work you do? Like who are you and how did you get started doing what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is LJ Norris. I am, I am the co-founder of a nonprofit organization in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, called Entheogenic Research Integration Education. We do a lot of work around offering educational events, community forums, and support groups such as integration, as you mentioned earlier, that can really just help people sort of engage with their experiences, both on the front side of it, so they learn a little bit more about how are people doing this in a sacred way, in a reverent way, how are people engaging with these experiences, what types of experiences are people having, and then after the experience with something like integration circles, which is basically a peer-based model of sharing experiences so people can make meaning of some of the profound and unusual things that can happen in an entheogenic experience. In addition to Erie, I also just completed my dissertation about a year ago. So I did research on ayahuasca experiences and integration. So same sort of, area, whereas Erie is a little bit more on the practical side of things, actually seeing it happen, working with people, engaging, helping support, doing the reflections, all that type of thing. My dissertation was a little bit more theoretical to really sort of see what types of experiences people are having. And also, what does integration even mean? Because it turns out in the scholarly literature, there's as many different definitions as you can think of about what people think integration is. It's not just the definition, but where are people integrating the material? What's the process? All these different types of things. So I really tried to get a better sense of that in my literature review to help sort of expand the understanding of it, because right now it's kind of focusing mostly on the psychotherapeutic paradigm. But oftentimes what happens is that when you have a dominant model that doesn't necessarily, it's kind of materialist reductionist worldview, oftentimes a lot of the paradigms aren't really thinking in the transpersonal models. There is transpersonal psychology, which does kind of help with that, is an expansion of consciousness. But these, a lot of times, sort of the dominant sort of mainstream paradigms for psychotherapy are a little bit more oriented in the brain or about experiences or life experiences. So the sacred isn't there. The idea of talking about spirit, and a lot of people in those circles actually are a little timid sometimes, and the reason they come to the circles is because they're like, well, I can't share this with a therapist. I'm talking about a multidimensional experience where there's entities and there's beings, and I'm seeing myself as a part of God, and that's diagnosis material. That's not floating around. So,
yeah.
So people are like, okay, so the best thing to do is like come in a circle where we're all together, we're all sharing profound experiences and having an opportunity to sort of, lessen the feeling of isolation and alienation that can happen when you have something profound happen and you don't know who to talk to. So that would be kind of more what's happening with the Erie. And then with my dissertation, I kind of did a little bit more on the theoretical side of things. In addition to all that, I'm also a co-founder and was a big supporter with a lot of the national movement now with Decriminalized Nature. Decriminalized Nature is a movement that started in December of 2018, and then passed in Oakland in June of 2019. The resolution that we're passing now in cities across the U.S., we have about 40 active cities currently. About 7 cities have passed, including Oakland, Santa Cruz, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Washington, D.C., Cambridge, Somerville, and then Northampton with the help of another group called Bay Staters. So the idea of this is to decriminalize at the city level and to start that conversation to build power up to the state level. Some basic entheogens. So entheogens are similar to psychedelics. People could say they're the same. Oftentimes psychedelics kind of refers to a particular subset, certain cultural genre from the 60s and 70s, that type of thing. You think about music, you think about art, you think about those different types of things, but it's hard to sort of then use that terminology for experiences in other countries, like with an ayahuasca, doing ayahuasca experience, not a psychedelic experience, it's happening in something else. So while entheogen also still has its faults, at least the idea there is to really sort of expand that, to talk about natural plants and mushrooms, to talk about the sacred inner experience, to talk about things that could be done maybe in a more traditional manner, those different types of things. So so the entheogens that we are looking at in Decrypt Nature are cacti containing mescaline, mushrooms containing psilocybin, plants containing ibogaine, and plant combinations similar to ayahuasca that contain DMT. So we think of typically ayahuasca is like Banisteriopsis caapi and Psychotria viridis or chacruna. But there's actually, if you look at the DMT, MAOI combinations across the world, there could possibly be 4,000 combinations around about that. So because that's really what ayahuasca is doing, is it's modulating DMT so you can drink it orally and have an experience. Typically, your body breaks down DMT pretty quickly. So with the MAOI, it allows you to have a 3 to 4 to 6 hour experience versus like a DMT. Without drinking orally, you'd have to be smoked, and that's much shorter, 15, 20 minutes. You're kind of up there and you're back. It's a great experience, interesting experience, very much in terms of mysticism and expanding beyond the mind. But with ayahuasca, it has a little bit of a slower in and out. So in terms of remembering things, in terms of really getting a sense of what happened, in terms of being able to bring stuff back for integration, can be really valuable for that. And that's also what I did my dissertation work on. But so those are the 3 kind of areas I'm working on right now.
Yeah, I wanted to take a step back. I know you're working with decriminalizing entheogens, and in terms of integration itself, I remember you said there's all sorts of definitions for that. When somebody sort of approaches you and comes to your program for integration, do you have a definition of how to help people with these experiences that they have? Because I feel like that's such a huge part where, for myself, is just trying to make sense of these visions that I have when you experimenting with psychedelics within the ceremonial context. And if you have no one really to talk about that, I feel like you have this knowing. Like your body knows what has happened to you, but consciously it's hard to really make sense of it, because these visions you have aren't always literal. Some of them can be metaphorical. But how do you describe integration to people when they come to you?
Yeah, so so on our website we kind of take the broader definition, and I think I've sort of narrowed it after my dissertation. On our website, we really talk about integration as a process of meaning making. For you to then take those lessons or insights and apply them into daily life. I would say, and now separate that out a little bit and say integration is the meaning making process, which Sean House and a couple other people have talked about in this kind of definition, but I prefer this one. And then implementation is the application in daily life, because exactly what you're saying, some of the experiences are metaphorical, some of them are symbolic, some of them are hidden meanings that it takes you much longer than 3 days to realize what happened. Maybe that's a year-long experience to really kind of, because they say the common thing is don't make any major life decisions before 2 weeks, because you might have experience and I need to quit my job tomorrow, right? You quit your job and then you're like, oh wait, maybe I just need to spend less time around my boss or something, or whatever reason. And then all of a sudden you're kind of stuck in a scenario where you're like, oh man. So to really kind of move that out a little bit so that people aren't, crystallizing what they think is the experience, give them some time to work it, give them some time to do that kind of stuff, and then dive into the implementation, which is a little bit more coaching, a little bit more like help, because sometimes the homework assignments, which is another term for implementation, that's the one I use at least. You get these insights. Oh, part of my personal spiritual growth, how I need to heal with my depression or my anxiety is I have to do these things, and then I'll come out and hopefully I'll have grown from that, but sometimes those are hard things, like writing relationships with people that you have a challenging time with, or going out of your way to maybe start an exercise regimen, which I don't do much, but different things like that.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that takes a little bit more effort. So that would be kind of the implementation side. The integration side is really kind of looking at the experience. I work a lot with art. Art integration is really great. That's for myself and for others. I've been finding that it's strange because you can have something where a line, you paint a line a certain way or a certain color combination, and then more of your experience comes through, or you have trying to really understand these bigger concepts or these sort of, like you say, abstract ideas, for example, how do you move through conscious awareness when you don't have a body anymore and you can't remember who your name is. What's moving through that space? Who's moving through that space? It's you, but what is it of you? Where are you on that level of consciousness? So things like that, that's really hard to just kind of piece together, but you kind of like can paint stuff or get some creative nonverbal ways to discuss it in the body. Sometimes I don't work with that myself, but I know some somatic experiencers that, or, body workers that work a lot with, I noticed when I was dealing with this one piece of trauma in my experience and my vision, that my shoulder was hurting a lot, and maybe they'll work the shoulder and see if they can, kind of unleash some of that trauma, and I don't know the ins and outs of all that, but that's what I understand kind of somatic experiencing, somatic therapy can do, or body work can do. So really wanting to expand the definition of integration out. My personal focus would be like on art integration or talking with the individual about the experience. And I have, a whole variety of questions that I maybe ask them. But, if it was somebody that was just kind of trying to figure it out themselves, I'd recommend try and journal a little bit of what the experience was, try and do some paint or some artwork or that type of thing. Talk to a peer that's maybe had a similar experience. That's key though, because you don't want to talk to somebody who's like, what are you talking about? Because it just dismisses all the benefits that could be arising from that. If there's like a challenging part of the experience, just like be okay with that, and then kind of definitely now you want to work a little bit more with people, maybe do a little bit more meditation, kind of thinking about it. But there's also the challenging experiences versus the positive beneficial experiences. And that's another part of my dissertation, was really trying to expand. If you look at the Johns Hopkins studies, the NYU studies, they mostly talk about a unitive mystical experience, right? So unitive mystical experience as defined by W.T. Stace and I forgot the name of the person who put together the scale. I'll remember in a minute. But basically the definition is like positive, blissful, unitive, all, joyful, these different types of things. So if somebody has like a really challenging death and dismemberment experience and they try to do integration, they're like, did I do it wrong? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, why didn't I have this positive, blissful experience? And not seeing, even though most of the time those experiences can be extremely transformative for an individual, then they're also feeling this like shame around like, well, if this is how I'm told they're supposed to be, and all of a sudden I had this type of experience, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
So really just making people feel comfortable and safe in that environment to be able to talk about whatever, non-hardcore kind of, that's we do the circles, but even one-on-one, no judgment, just kind of listening to the experience and trying to guide the person into not offering advice, but suggestions. Have you read this book, or what do you think about this, or have you ever tried this practice? And that can be really helpful, because the idea is really for them to be able to make meaning of their experience. And I think that's what's missing in some of the current models of integration, is like somebody that you're working with is making the meaning for you, right, instead of you making the meaning. And it's your experience. You can only, even though you might be able to say some words about the experience, a lot of it's ineffable. Ineffable is relational. That's why you can't really talk about it, because it's not this, it's this other thing that's beyond me, but I don't know. So to really allow that person to make their own meaning of it, but set the context, prepare the field, let them plant the seeds, water it with them, that type of thing, and see what comes out and sprouts.
Yeah, I could see how making art helps with somebody making the meaning for themselves. I've always had a lot of help from people, even with just dreams, just trying to make sense of what they mean, what is filtering out from the unconscious to my conscious mind. And I see it very similar to what's happening with psychedelics, sort of this unconscious messages that you get to tap into a little deeper that come to you through a journey. Do you think that's the case, or do you think it's more something outside of you, like you are literally an antenna tapping into something where you're receiving information? Or I think we were talking earlier about these plants, the perspective that they have their own consciousness, and then they are actually giving you this wisdom. It's not coming from you, or it's a combination of both. Where do you stand on all that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I'm going to talk about from my personal beliefs, and these are my opinions and only my opinions, right? But no, I definitely, from my experiences, it becomes pretty clear that there are some experiences that it's a different level of consciousness, a different state of consciousness, but it's still within you. And then there are some, and that's for me mostly with the synthetics, you know, with research chemicals, with, you know, LSD, with MDMA. It's kind of like an expanded part of me, right? When it comes to the plant medicines like mushrooms or ayahuasca or even DMT, that's kind of a different scenario, you know, especially with ayahuasca. With mushrooms initially, you know, and I've learned now since, I'm like, well, maybe there is something more with mushrooms. I was like, okay, this is, you know, and I was studying neuroscience when I was in the undergrad. So my mind was very much in the mechanistic worldview, and spirit really, okay, then whatever. But, you know, this is just a higher sense or expanded state of consciousness. And then after ayahuasca, it was kind of like, oh, yep, okay, so there's another thing there. There's a consciousness out there. There's a reality that's outside of me, like, you know, or I mean, from a you know, mechanistic mindset. And I think this is guy Benny Shannon, who wrote the Antipodes of the Mind on ayahuasca phenomenology, talks about this. He's basically saying, if it's not the case, then consciousness is so far more advanced than any of us could even imagine. Because, like, you know, the reality of this kind of wisdom, this, you know, it's beyond anything I could imagine. It's things that are dealing with the nature of reality that I've never even thought about before, you know, and sure, it could be in me, or maybe I read it at some point in time, but it's just so profound. It's just like, is that possibly just a higher level of consciousness? Is there something coming on there? Or like being able to review certain aspects of your life with this sort of wisdom figure there, kind of guiding you and offering you insights that you maybe would have never thought before, to reconsider, you know, this scenario. Maybe a bad relationship happened, and, you know, there's some wisdom there that's saying like, hey, you know, da 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 da. Like, okay, well, I never thought of that in my life ever, but now this is really so what is that? What is that? You know, and I think that's a really interesting question that we're well behind in terms of trying to, or we've left it behind, I should say, because a lot of these traditional cultures, ayahuasqueros, shamans, medicine people, taitas, you know, marakames, they all talk about the spirit realm. They all talk about the wisdom of the plants and all that type of thing. So it's not an uncommon idea. It's just an uncommon idea in this paradigm, you know? And so we have to kind of get out of that. And yes, it can be helpful for, you know, psychological healing, you know, but what's really happening when somebody's depressed? Is it healing depression? Is it reconnecting us to nature or the sacred or community or ourselves, which, having lost that connection, is depressing, you know? And so, like, how we even look at mental health right now needs to be readdressed. So this idea of animism, which is what we were talking about earlier, where everything is alive, really allows us to have a different relationship with the experience. It's not something that happened to us. It happened with us. You know, we're in a dialogue or conversation with these plants. And I think from the healing perspective, that's much more interesting in terms of what can happen, what the possibilities are, the investment of the individual now to partake in this. And I have some pretty interesting, you know, coincidences of experiences where I was like, that's really weird, you know, like there's something else going on here. It's not just
like what? Like what have you sort of...
Yeah, so one experience I can think of in particular, I was living in Hawaii at the time, and probably like monthly getting calls about doing ayahuasca circles. So going out there doing that. And then, yeah, so I got these big homework assignments, right? Like, okay, don't come back until you do these things. Right? And I'm like, okay, so yeah, that's, you know, during the experience, it's like, okay, that's real. You come home, you know, you have your first little bit of salt, you take a share, you know, all that kind of things that you start to get off your diet. The afterglow kind of wears down.
Yeah.
Those homework assignments are still hard. You know, it's the list numbers that you never cross off, you know. So you know, when you create a list, they say, make sure you break down the list. Cause it's like, if your list is do dissertation, you're never going to do that. It's like, write first chapter. Okay. That's a start, you know? So it's kind of like that kind of list, right?
Yeah.
So the homework assignments were pretty heavy, and I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll just deal with it again when I have my next ceremony, right? And maybe I didn't understand them correctly. You know, all the excuses we give ourselves for why we're not crossing those numbers off the list, right? And a couple months go by, and I was like, oh wow, you know, I haven't heard anything about or ayahuasca circles around, you know. But I'm not thinking about the homework assignments because I already put those in the back of my head, you know. 5 months go by, 6 months go by, I still don't hear anything from this guy. This guy doesn't know anything about my homework assignments, or, you know, if I completed them or any of that stuff, right? It was just all inner experience. And then like 7, 8 months go by, I start to worry a little bit. I know he's getting on a plane, flying to get here. where I was living at the time. So I was like, I hope he's okay. I started to get into the more like the worried zone. About 9 months go by, 10 months go by. I finished the first homework assignment, and it was like that like they call it symbolic latency. This idea that like sometimes you just have to keep watering, and eventually the seed will pop up. So like this whole process of my life, I was doing these things that got me closer and closer to this first homework assignment. And then as soon as I did it, like, boom, oh yeah, that's right, I had these homework assignments. Oh shoot, I got to do these, right? And then I'm like starting, that's weird that I haven't heard anything back from him, and I better get these homework assignments done, right? Finished the second homework assignment. I won't say what these next two ones were, but kind of like tricky and challenging. Finished the third homework assignment, which involved a relational issue. Wanted to help heal a relational issue, and this person came over to Maui, and we went up to Halakala Crater and had a really beautiful kind of weekend, and just like healed some of the challenges that were there, right? I took them to the airport the next day at left at 11, got back home at 12. No joke, 12:01. Ring ring. Hey, we're doing ayahuasca ceremony next weekend. You want to come? It's
wow.
Like, wow. I mean, like, okay, we could say that's a coincidence. We can synchronicity. We could come up with a million different excuses. But at the same time, it was like, that was really, for me, even more interesting, just because of like, it took me the process to get there before whatever it was that will reopen that door in order to have an experience again. So those are the types of things that really make you, and again, in the process of integration, it really kind of incentivizes you a little bit more. It's like, okay, yeah, well, there is something else I'm working with here. There is a teacher, guide, spirit, that's helping. And so to make sure to take care of some of these personal or spiritual growth issues, which is what we're doing the ayahuasca for anyway, to be able to take care of that, then it's like, okay, it's not just like I'm hanging out here and left to my own accord. There's also another relational thing happening here. And so yes, that's just one kind of example of something that was really kind of like, wow.
Yes, that's insane. For the first time in my life, I was in Hawaii in the spring with a friend of mine, sort of during the pandemic, and we went to the Big Island. And I didn't have any plant ceremonies, but I was working with a medicine man, spiritual elder of a Native American church here in Berkeley. And during the pandemic, I was helping him run classes, and he was teaching people how to, of Native American ways, how to pray. And within this class of, doing video production, we're friends. He said something that really stuck out to me, which was gifting plants tobacco. And he's saying how they like tobacco, and it's an offering. So I was like, okay, I'll use this as an opportunity when I go to Hawaii to go into an old growth forest and give some tobacco there, but also hike down into the old cauldron of Kilauea and throw down some tobacco there. So I do both those things. And that night, I went back to my hotel, and I was trying to do some yoga out in the balcony at night. I just felt the presence of like two spirits come to the balcony, and I could feel a presence, but in my third eye, I could kind of like see, and I was kind of freaked out. So I went inside, shut the door. Went inside, still felt the presence of whatever, and I was just trying to pretend like it wasn't happening. And then got on my bed, turned off the lights, and almost felt like these spirits were working on my ethereal body and like cleaning something out. But it was my first sort of interaction with what I think was nature spirits, and I never really understood. Like, I've heard people talk about nature spirits, but I don't know what that even means or like have an understanding of it. So I don't know, does any of that stand out to you, or like, do you like, what are nature spirits? Have you ever talked to people about it? Like, what's the deal with that?
Sure.
What's
the deal with nature spirits? I mean, you're also dealing with Hawaii energy, and that's a whole other level there. I mean, I've seen, okay, granted, it was I was in Halakala Crater, and the fog was there, and again, there's like the the normal mind that tries to explain it away, and then there's the like, was that really true or what, right? So my normal mind said it was a bunch of nene geese which are up there that got scared and they made this noise and et cetera, et cetera. But what I saw was through the fog, these menehune, which are like little, for lack of a better term, elves or dwarves or magical small creatures in Hawaii that have been there for before the Hawaiians, and they have all these like artifacts and things like that. Like kind of bowl cuts, just with like a little loin on the bottom, kind of came out of the clouds, like switched this, and they're supposed to be tricksters too, right? Switched the sign on us so it went the other direction, and then started laughing, and then disappeared, right? And so I was like, what was that, right? And at that point was the full moon hike we were doing into the crater, and there was like, probably 20 of us. At that point, half of the group got lost in the other group. So it was like, there was like this, because of whatever happened there with that science, whether it was really happening or something, a lot of people went the other direction, which wasn't the wrong direction because it went back to a loop. They just had to do an extra mile and a half to get there, So, so that's, there's so many things that happen in Hawaii, especially they say, a lot of the islands are that instant karma. It's like, if you do something crappy, it's going to hit you pretty hard, pretty quickly. Or if you do something like, open up to the spirits and give them an offering, then they're more likely to like offer some assistance. Although our initial reaction is like, oh my gosh, what's happening? There's this other thing I don't understand. That's, and it sounds like at the end they were actually helping out, which is really good. And so I think that's important. But offering tobacco, I think, is really what we hear a lot. I'm curious if that's sort of across all different cultures, because obviously tobacco is coming from South America, that type of thing. But I'm sure that there's some sort of offering of some sort that comes in other different cultures as well, for spirits, for plants, for nature, for mushrooms, all that kind of stuff. So
what is it about this paradigm that we live here in America versus the other paradigms where, people actually recognize and experience spirit, and like why are we so ignorant of it and not like unaware of it? Like, even having like visions or even feeling sort of the unknown that's around us. It's harder to find, science can science sort of experience it or experiment with it? But I don't know. Why do you think we're so ignorant to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's because we base so much of our science upon what can be measured. And as of right now, we don't have a method for measuring spirit or entities or qualitative things even, I mean, it's all quantitative numbers and this, that, and the other. You have to have a measuring tape to figure it out, or, whatever else. So the idea of measurement, I think, is a big part, a downfall. The reductionist is, and also you have to like reduce things down to this like, very small thing. And, I mean, some people would say that once you get to the higher levels of math and quantum physics and other things, that you start to get into the mystical realms again, because again, measurements kind of break down at those points, and so here we are now having to talk about things that can't be talked about. And so they take on this personification of maybe spirits, and the scientific perspective. But I think it also, I mean, I think that's kind of like the main thing. I think in general, maybe as a subconscious sabotage of the Western world, if I can use that terminology, it really helps controlling powers to not have you be empowered to realize that you're part of spirit. Because then you don't have to be dependent upon the state or the government or whatever else. You can say, hey, wait, I'm connected to this much larger thing. And you're sure, of course, there's all these things that, we are unfortunately dependent upon in a lot of ways and that type of thing. But I think when you have a sense of connection to the sacred or a connection to the spirit, the ability to use fear to manipulate somebody is a lot harder. When we work within a context of the military industrial complex, and it's, we have to go kill those people, give us more money so we can do it. If you're connected to spirit, you're like, that's bullshit. What are you talking about, right? Yeah. And so the way that a lot of our capital and capitalism in general, it's extracting. It's a never-ending cycle of, non-sustainability. When you start realizing, like, wait a second, like, do we really need to cut all those trees down because, we can't grow hemp to do the same thing with books, or, all the different things, cut that mountaintop down for energy instead of like using our minds to make something that's more energy efficient, So I think there's a lot of different, the measurement thing, the capitalism thing, the fear thing, all those things in general make it difficult for a mental paradigm to sort of engage with spirit. Now, there's this guy, Gene Gebser, who's a philosopher from Germany way back in the day, and he talks about mutations of consciousness instead of saying evolution of consciousness, because we don't know, the next mutation of consciousness might be worse. So we can't say it's necessarily an evolution. But he says it's gone through this like archaic, then magical, if you look over time, then mythical. So how we view ourselves. Archaic is like we're one with the world. Magical is like we're engaging in a direct relationship with the world. Mythical is like I can tell you a story about a god who did the thing the magical people did, right? And the mental is how do I measure that, right? And then now he's saying that we're moving into, that's kind of collapsing the mental, and we're moving into the integral mutation of consciousness, which is supposedly to be the archaic, the magic, the mythical, and the mental all together. And so we're seeing that with like science working with psychedelics. Okay, now science is going to have to figure out how do we talk about these things, you know. You know, a lot of these other things, you know, people are becoming more aware of spirit and sacred. Like, how do we measure that? How do we do that? Can we do it? People are asking those questions now. So we're kind of moving out of that into this sort of more meshed or merged consciousness or mutation of consciousness, which involves all these other sort of states, which would be interesting if that's the case. Obviously, it's theoretical philosophy, so you know, we don't know for sure.
That reminds me of, I've been hearing how like knowledge from the South, knowledge from the East, West, and North are all going to merge, and just like ways of knowing the world. So what you're saying in terms of mutations of consciousness really reminds me of that all those different ways of knowing and perceiving the world will be integrated with one another.
But the mental still has to fight it out. It's not dead enough yet for that merge to happen. So there's going to be more, I think, you know, anytime that the status quo is moving on beyond itself, it like fights to keep the power, you know. And so I think that's kind of the stage we're in right now, you know, this crazy chaos that we're seeing.
Yeah. And that also reminds me of what you're saying of just like denying spirit, like, you know, relying on the government or whoever for more control. Reminds me of what's happening now with UFOs, where like they've been denying the existence of it for years now, but they finally have come out and say, hey, yeah, these things actually do exist, and we actually don't know what they are, but they're saying it's real now compared to it. It's, you know, you're crazy or whatever. Right. And that reminds me a lot about spirit too, like what you're saying, how a lot of people deny that reality. And that's even like hard to define what that is. Like what is the spirit, or, you know, like what do you think that is a part of us? Like how would you define what spirit. That is? Yeah.
So I would say spirit would be it would be something outside. So I would say that there's spirit in three-dimensional plane. So that might be like ghosts, you know, or things that phase in and out. But I think there's also other dimensions. So I think, you know, like there's probably tons of spirits right here just on different vibrations or dimensions. And I know that kind of gets into the, oh, that's kind of woo, whatever. But at the same time, like, you know, there's possibility for this. I've seen this in a lot of my experiences in terms of my ayahuasca experiences and things like that. So I think that there's something to be said for just being sort of immersed in this spiritual world, but in a three-dimensional plane that we can't see it. You know, we only see a portion of the visible light and that type of thing. And a funny story about UFOs and spirit as well. You know, I was hiking El Camino de Santiago in like 2004, right? And it's like a hike across northern part of Spain. I started in the French side of the Pyrenees Mountains and walked all the way to the ocean, you know, so it was about 500 some miles total.
Wow.
Really, really beautiful hike, done a long time ago by the pagans as they watched the sun die into the ocean at the farthest westerly point of Spain. It was taken over by the Catholic Church many years afterwards, and then St. James's bones were buried in Santiago. But from Santiago to Finisterre is like another 3-day hike, and it's like all the infrastructure is gone. You have to hike much for like, so they kind of like are trying to like swallow up the pagan tradition, you know, and kind of make this more about this sort of St. James, you know, hike. So that was a really interesting hike. But along the way, one of the evenings, it was going to be a full moon. I was in kind of because sometimes it's mountainous, sometimes it's hilly, sometimes it's flat. So I happened to hit the flat spot right around the same time there's going to be a full moon. So I was like, oh, wow, this is great opportunity. There's going to be tons of lights because the full moon. Maybe I'll just enjoy the evening, because as you get farther and farther along on the hike, more and more people start, you know, coming on. The thing about the Camino de Santiago, I did it in a holy year. So this actually was before the Sinners 100, but during a holy year, if you hike 100 kilometers, you get a piece of paper that's signed by the Pope or stamped by the Pope. It says all your sins are abolished.
Wow. Okay.
So 2004, previous that, I'm totally clear.
That's awesome.
I've been building up since then, but at least I have that document, right? So anyway, so what happens is, people that are doing this hike, like I was doing it for other reasons. That was just the year that I happened to go. But like everyone comes in the last 100 kilometers, so they call it the Sinners 100, because all of a sudden you go from being like nobody's around to a few people are around to like the whole trail is packed, people talking on their cell phones, people taking taxi because you get your little passport stamp from place to place. So quite a different drastic change, So this was a little bit before that, but it was still kind of a lot of people on the hike. So I was like, I just spend some time and just do like an evening meditation, if you will. I went to go crash at a park from like 4 to 10, do like a midday evening or mid-evening sleep, And I met a guy from Spain that while I was sitting there, and he's like, oh, hey, what's going on? What are you doing? And he was doing the hike as well. He spoke Spanish and English. And I was like, oh, yeah, I think I'm going to do a full moon hike tonight. He's like, oh, that's a great idea. Like, do you mind if I join you? I was like, sure, why not? It's going to be a full moon hike. It's good to have somebody just hang out, So I passed out, woke up at about 10, and all of a sudden he's there with 4 other people. I was like, oh, okay, right? So, which in the end, I'm happy there were so many people with me, because it was one of those things that was just like, whoa. So he was from Spain. He spoke Spanish and English. There was a guy from Germany that spoke German and English, but no Spanish. A guy from Italy that just spoke Italian, and a woman from the Canary Islands that just spoke Spanish, right? So we're all there, and we could communicate, but not necessarily directly, through somebody else or something like that. So, but you were like, hey, let's do this full moon hike. This would be great. So first I was kind of like, all right, well, I was kind of hoping to be more peaceful, but okay, maybe 5 people is good, right? So, so we start off the hike, and we have like about a kilometer distance between the last person and the first person. We're all just enjoying the evening. It's beautiful out. It's flat land, so we don't have to worry about anything. There's some train tracks and a little bench there. So the first person stopped and waited, and we all kind of caught up. And then we got back up again and started hiking. And this thing comes out of the sky, kind of triangular, coming down, all lit up, kind of like almost like a flame, like a match, kind of, and then it kind of like spun up quick and then went off like that, right? And at that moment, we all spoke different languages. At that moment, we all spoke the same language, which was, holy shit, what? Like every hair, and I have a lot of antenna on my body. Every hair on my body was like, boing.
Oh, wow.
Like standing up on end. I had no idea. And probably the whole thing lasted maybe, which felt like eternity, 30 seconds, 30, 40 seconds, something like that. So, and it wasn't like, oh, I saw this little light in the sky. It was pretty dramatic, and so, yes, that was pretty interesting. And then and I can imagine, because this is the Camino de Santiago, if I had been doing this 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, that would have been a spirit or an angel. There's that same sort of connection, the way it looked, the essence of it, the feeling on the skin, all that kind of stuff, right? So, so actually we went to go pass out when we finally arrived, passed out. The Italian gentleman and the lady from the Canary Islands stopped at a couple towns ahead of us because they were a little bit older and like, we're not going to hike this all tonight. So, so the next day we see the guy from Italy, and he has a newspaper. I was like, what's this? And 20 kilometers north of where we were, there's a picture of 2 people pointing up at the sky. So it was in the news, whatever this thing was. And we found out later that the Portuguese Air Force also saw it and didn't know what it was. So
oh, wow.
It was UFO, UAP. If it was a military project, they have some pretty advanced technology, but nobody knew what it was. So, so that was kind of one of those scenarios where we're actually seeing something, but then seeing it on the trail, everyone was kind of interpreting it as spirit. Everyone was interpreting it as, oh, maybe you saw this thing, and I can't say that wasn't the case either. I guess having the Air Force pick it up would assume that it wasn't spirit,
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see how there's some similarities around the unknown, around the mystery, around looking for answers to something that's beyond us, and I think that when it comes to things like spirit, things like UFOs, now we're opening up to the conversation of UFOs, but I think maybe then it's going to be just a natural, because the whole idea of why UFOs would be mind-blowing, or the whole idea of why spirit would be mind-blowing, is because we're also we're sort of in this second Copernican revolution, right? Where we think that the universe revolves around our consciousness, i.e. there's no other conscious beings in all the universe. And so then all of a sudden we realize that there are other conscious beings in the universe or the multiverse, and all of a sudden it's kind of mind blowing, right? Just like we realize that, you know, the universe didn't revolve around the Earth; it actually revolved around the sun, and there's other galaxies, and there's, you know, all this kind of stuff. So I think that's another thing. Just like, hopefully the UFO conversation will expand minds enough that now the conversation around spirit, around the sacred, around spiritual beings, entities, those type of things will kind of become more easier for people to digest.
Yeah, and I'm sort of seeing it happen very slowly here in America. I mean, with podcasts and the information sort of getting out more freely. But sort of like go off your UFO story, I have one as well, where when I was a teenager, I just got off a show with a friend, and I was standing kind of like leaning back onto a car, looking up into the sky, and he was standing in the middle of the road. We're just like talking, and as he's talking to me, I'm like just staring up into the sky, and I see what I thought was a shooting star, but it stopped, and when it stopped, it turned a different color, and then it shot across the sky, turned another color, went across the sky, did another color. It was doing this, like the distances it was doing was really far, and just making these like designs going back and forth, changing color, and just shot out of, I don't know, our galaxy or something. Mm-hmm. It was, and that it made me cry. Like I'd never seen anything like that before, and I told my friend in front of me, I was like, I just saw a UFO, and he's like, nah, shut up, like you're lying. And like it's like, no, and that's the thing, like people think like you're lying when you have these like mm-hmm. experiences. And like oddly enough, like I know people around me who've seen similar UFOs like that, like our engineer MacGyver, he's seen that too. I know he doesn't have a mic right now, but we've had conversations about this where he was up in Northern California, Napa, and he saw a similar thing. Mm. And I just think things like that are just like very odd. Mm-hmm. And I've heard even like I don't know if it was the Pope, when you talk about angels, or like they can be also considered as aliens, and you know how they could potentially have intervened in our lives and within our evolution. I think that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's just, yeah.
I really like, I think you touched on an important point again that sort of bears back to that previous question about why is it that this paradigm doesn't allow for that? And sure, it could be all the things that I mentioned, but you touched on another one there, which is that people's disbelief. And, I think that this is one spot where you can like really use the Matrix analogy in a good way, which is like the Agent Smith character, right? Like as soon as somebody comes in and says something that's in, kind of contrast or alternate to the mainstream paradigm understanding of like UFOs don't exist, spirit doesn't exist, blah, 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 blah. Somebody will like respond to you, even somebody that maybe you would think wouldn't respond that way would also, kind of turn into this like program and be like, oh, that's not true. You're lying, da, 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 all this kind of stuff, and kind of attacking you. For your own felt lived experience, and so why does that happen? What's going on there? Instead of somebody just like taking, what is it, their own psychological process of like fear, if that exists, or that like, is there like an ego thing of like, I'm going to disprove you, like instead of just like hearing somebody and saying like, wow, I'd like to learn more about that. And again, that's where maybe we've reduced down the mystery so much that we need to know the answers, and if we don't know the answers, then it's BS. And instead of saying like, well, let me take some time, and that's also what's works with integration, I think a positive way to do it, let me take some time and not judge you or not say no or I don't believe you, but unpack that, because there's something interesting there, and there's mystery that we can kind of learn from each other, and so yeah, that's another thing I think is a part and parcel of sort of our current society, where it's so people are so quick to judge or to say no or not to believe you, and then the effect on you, as the effect on me when I tell the story, way back, was like, oh well, maybe I didn't see it. So was that really there?
Yeah.
You start doubting yourself, and then you're kind of stuck in the scenario where you got to kind of believe to be open to that, to also like sort of be a part of it, And so there's this like mechanism of like reducing your growth down again to be like in this vibration or this 3D plane, so to speak, Yeah.
Did you have sort of like referring back to the Matrix, sort of like a wake up moment, like when you were a teenager, or like how did you even get into consciousness studies and involved with this?
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, definitely just kind of being like, there's more here. I remember specifically like I was 13, 14 years old being like, just this understanding of like what's happening isn't right. And there's a lot more to this, you know. I was kind of lucky to, you know, I mean, my grandpa was a mortician, so there's playing around coffins and bodies, all that kind of stuff is also opening to the fact that there might be spirits, and you know, and seeing bodies being embalmed and seeing like the business of death, and then seeing sort of the grieving process of families, and then behind it all seeing the bodies and everything like that. So as a child, I kind of was, you know, more into open to the idea of spirit, I would say, you know. And then I think, you know, I went through my college kind of career and was very much more focused on kind of, you know, the neuroscience for a little bit there. But then I came across, I mean, this is a beautiful story because one of the kind of the first people that really showed me a good way to journey was a woman named Phoenix. Appropriate name, right? Phoenix is great, you know. So and really just telling me to kind of close my eyes, go inwards, you know, be in dark spaces, you know, like, you know, maybe not have too much music, just kind of be silent if possible and have those inner journeys. And I think that kind of helped open me up a lot in terms of the possibilities. I wouldn't say I had done an awakening at that point in time, but definitely was, you know, more aware. And then I think over the course of life, and then once you start getting that awareness, it's like this slow process of like being able to see things differently, and then all of a sudden being like, well, that doesn't make sense, or that's a lie, or that's contradictory, or what's going on here, what's this fear, you know. And so once you start realizing that and sort of unpacking that, then that's you realize like, wow.
You know? Wait, how did you cross paths with Phoenix?
She actually lived next door to me when I was at school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And you were just sort of casually talking about the nature of reality one day, and she was like, oh, actually I know how to journey within these realms. And like, how did
I mean, we didn't really talk about the nature of reality per se, but we talked, you know, because I think, you know, we both are smokers, smoke cannabis, and so I think there's the natural sort of evolution to, oh, you ever tried mushrooms? Oh
yeah, okay.
But I mean, I think then from there the conversations around the nature of reality, on nature of consciousness, all that kind of stuff kind of emerged. Because once you can banter with somebody, I think it helps. You know, you don't know for sure if you can banter with somebody about consciousness or the nature of reality, then you're like, is it worth trying? Like, you know, like I could, but you know, you might say that's BS and you're lying, or you know, all the things that your friend was saying earlier. You start opening up that conversation, and then there's a reaction. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, okay, never mind. You know, so, but no, I think that was kind of part of the journey experience with us, and then, you know, talking during the experiences was really sort of mind opening, and you know, of course, for me, it was also a big contrast from what I was learning in my neuroscience classes, because no one's talking about consciousness in neuroscience. They're talking about, oh, this is what the drug does to your brain. And I'm like, well, I had a mushroom experience and it felt kind of different than what I'm reading in the book here. Like, what are you missing? You know, like, how is this possible? So that kind of opened my eyes up in terms of the inability for science, the ineffectiveness of science to describe some of these experiences, you know. And that luckily for me kind of helped me transition, because at the end of my undergrad I had to do animal studies, because doing neuroscience, that was kind of the direction I was just going to start going, and I was like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And then I ended up going to get my dissertation a little bit more on the sort of mystical side of things, the sacred side of things, so to have that balance of different energies, but really seeing that while this doesn't explain everything, this certainly doesn't even touch on some of those things. So at least this allows the exploration of consciousness. If somebody wants to do an MRI or whatever else to find out what your brain's doing, okay, great. You know? But in terms of how that explains your experience, or why these experiences are coming up, or what types of experiences are people having, or what is consciousness for different people, like neuroscience and MRIs are really kind of simple.
I mean, has science sort of caught up in some ways where it, I thought now they're sort of admitting that consciousness is not only inside of you, it's also outside of you. Is that?
I mean, that's, I've heard that. I don't know. I haven't heard that. I mean, I think you'd have to find I wouldn't say neuroscientists would say that.
Okay.
Right. And that's kind of like the hip new sort of, you know, religion of science is neuroscience. You know, okay, it's lighting up this part of the brain, or, you know, default mode network and all that kind of stuff. Because they have to kind of say everything existing in the brain, because that's where they do their work. Right?
Yeah.
And so the idea that we're swimming in consciousness still hasn't quite broached, I think, the neuroscience realm, although maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe there are. I know that there have been some neuroscientists that have been trying to work on things like the hard problem of consciousness, so like Stuart Hameroff, and he has a interesting theory, but again, it's a theory. He goes all the way down to the microtubules in the cell, and there's a collapse of the third and fourth dimension through some sort of mechanism, and that collapse at 100,000 times per microsecond is a conscious moment, right? We don't know if that's the case, but he like went through the process to actually try and figure it out, so I give him props for that, but yeah, so people have kind of explored that idea, and they're trying to sort of look into it, but I don't think it's a mainstream idea by any means yet. But maybe it will be. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, just from my own experiences, that's what my intuition tells me, is that it's not localized here in the brain. You mentioned your experiences with Phoenix. I've had experience with shamans, just with a drum and journeying with that, and having visions, and part of me is like, is this just my imagination, or is this just my unconscious I'm having these visions of? But in remote viewing as well, where you can go and see other parts of the world, go out into outer space if you want to. It just seems like something that you can project out into the world and see if that eye is open. And if it's not, I could see why you don't have that ability. But yeah, my intuition is saying like, no, it's not.
And I think, oh, sorry.
No, that was it. Yeah.
I think that there's probably the closest, outside of just like strange far out consciousness research, which isn't provable by any means. I think the closest that researchers currently are getting is back to that dream stuff. The people that have done that lucid dream research, which I think is interesting. They haven't found success yet. There's some studies, for example, where people that would have, because there's I'm sure you know about this, maybe you don't, but like they've been able to test the body and have the person in the dream be able to communicate to the researcher that they've begun their lucid dream. So lucid dream would be like waking up inside of your dream and then being conscious and being able to move around and kind of control the dream and create things in a conscious way, instead of just being asleep and having it happen to you. So the way that they would go back and forth is they would have they would say to the person, when you become conscious in your dream, when you become lucid, watch a scene. And they figured out that the eyes in the dream will do the same thing as the eyes in real life. So they would have an eye combination, like left, right, center, left, or something like that. Watch this thing happen so your eyes move back and forth, and then I'll know to start recording. And when they start recording, they would have like a task to do. So things like, running up a hill, they would actually get, their whole body would, kind of react to that. One woman had sex and she had an orgasm, and that was able to be told, but through like the measurements and that type of thing. But there was one thing that they were trying to do more in the psi realm, which is like, okay, put a number in a manila envelope underneath your pillow, and in your lucid dream, go under your pillow, open it up, and tell me what the number is. And it was not really statistically significant, but they're starting then to sort of ask these questions. So dreams allow people, because everyone has a dream. Like nobody, even the most hardcore mechanistic scientist, is not going to say, oh yeah, dreams don't exist. Probably they've all seen a dream at least one point in time in their life, right? So I think that's an easy in, because okay, here's this thing that's beyond measurement, and then they're trying to measure it in certain ways and figure it out. And even like being, I'm always a little timid when it gets to like too much of the technological sort of thing, but they even have studies where people were able to record some of that on an external screen. I think that was even happening at Berkeley, if I remember correctly, some sort of thing where they were able to record like vision to an external screen. Now, if that was to get, done right and done in integrity, it'd be really interesting to be able to go back and review your visions or your dreams or your ayahuasca experiences or whatever else, and like have a full kind of recording of it, be like, oh, actually, okay, interesting, but of course that's also kind of dystopian in its own sense, so yeah. But I think when it comes to dreams and measurements and that type of thing, it gets us closer to that ability to sort of explore consciousness in a sort of deeper way, as you're seeking. I think we'll like close out with this, but I'm curious with the research you've done with ayahuasca, and any sort of observations or conclusions you sort of
have had from working with it, both in academia and outside of it. I don't know. Has anything sort of like stuck out with you from working on it with yourself and with other people? Are there like any common themes or things you think are truths to it using it? Or I don't know. I'm just kind of curious. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that the common themes, I would say, well, first and foremost, that it's much more profound than I expected. That the experiences are, if done in good reverent way, can be very beyond imagination, beyond consciousness, really great for healing, really great for going back to experiences and sort of rehashing issues and things like that. I would say that some of the themes that come up would be kind of like, at least for my dissertation, kind of traveling to multidimensional realms. A thing that was really common was sort of upgrades or entity surgeries or things like that, where like a doctor of sorts would like take the brain out and do surgery on it and put it back in. Okay, that person's, so there's like this visionary healing process that's happening, or surgery or upgrade, and oftentimes that would be needed for people to get into the next realm. So it was like a stopping point, like, okay, here we are, and this is like from people that aren't really talking to each other. These are from recorded transcripts and things like that, or people are talking in like integration circles that don't know the other stories. They're not really getting influenced by each other, So those types of themes come up. The idea of like a death and dismemberment comes up. Obviously UFOs, entities are really common. The types of entities kind of would come up a lot. Death and rebirth experiences were pretty common. The fact that like there was a difference between death and rebirth and a death and dismemberment, which is also interesting, where death and rebirth is like a passive process. Like, oh, I'm dying. And oftentimes it was positive and blissful, kind of in that same unit of mystical experience. Whereas somebody that has another experience where like the universe is crushing me and it ripped my arms off and it told me all the shitty things I've done in my life and all these things. And it's like much more active, like there's an entity doing something, or the universe is doing something, or the ayahuasca is doing something in the dismemberment process, and that's much more difficult for the individual. But oftentimes this like would heal the fear around death and dying, whereas this would heal like major traumas or cause major transformation or something like that. So it almost is like some of the difficulties was necessary for the big shifts, for that big change. So I would say in terms of an experience, like, sure, it's great to have the positive and blissful one, and we don't want to necessarily run into the ones that are challenging and difficult, but for people that are doing it to like realize like those challenging and difficult ones can be really, really, really successful at healing, because it shakes, this idea of quantum change, which is this quick, sudden transformation. And in the bottom of that, like the shift comes from a surprise or a shock, or that type of thing. It like opens some space for there to be something that happens. So some of these challenging experiences are shocking, and it shakes you up a little bit so you can reform again, instead of it being like, oh, okay, everything's perfect. And plants that need roots, sometimes you want to put just a little bit of water in there so the roots grow more. If it's full of water, it's not really going to grow as many roots, that type of thing. So I would say those are some of the different themes that came up. And then I think in terms of my own personal process, really just taking it to that next level of seeing it as something that's a sacred experience, something that is about something to be respectful, something to pay attention to, so that people don't go off and do it kind of in a superficial or recreational way, to really just sort of honor it as a healing process. You don't need to do it all the time either. I know people are like, oh, I'm doing it, and I was like that at one point too, but then all of a sudden you're like, all right, I'm just going to sit and let some of these experiences like percolate, and see what comes up, simmer a little bit. And so I don't know if I answered your question, but those are some of the themes and some of the things that I've learned from ayahuasca. Yeah.
No, you totally did. I mean, from me, I think I've been to one of your integration groups a long time ago, and I think since then I've gone to another ceremony, and I'm trying to make sense of it, whether it was literal or not. I'm not really sure. But I experienced almost like going into like seeing snakes being wrapped by snakes, and then from that having a vision of going into almost what looked like a black hole. And like once I entered the hole, that's when all the visions started happening. But something was talking to me the entire time, and was sort of giving me like these nuggets of wisdom. Like, for example, is like your heart is actually the seat of consciousness, and your mind is just a tool that you can use and sharpen it. But that's all it is a tool. But you actually exist in your heart. And sort of like moved on to other things, and it felt like somebody moved my head, and I was looking into the forest, and I saw the trees ignite, engulf in fire, and I saw fires everywhere around me, and I just saw like the words environmental science. That was very odd. And I saw a lot of other things, but it was really weird about that. It was like, it was almost just like predicting the fires that are all around us, you know, before they happen. It was just a very odd experience to see them before they happened, although it's known that there's forest fires. You know, it was just an odd experience. And yeah, it was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in my entire life, working with that medicine. And yeah, before we go, is there anything you kind of want to plug that you're doing or that you're excited about at all?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, all three things I mentioned earlier, I mean, I'll be doing a lot of talks. So if you ever want to kind of learn more about integration, contact us. If you are interested in more in doing integration circles, go to erievision.org. If you want to help create or change policy in your city, wherever that might be, we've been helping a lot of cities, just basically give them all the tools, give them support, help them along the way, give them guidance in terms of how to engage with their city council members, empower them to sort of learn the process of direct democracy, which I think we've forgotten. Another thing, you know, part of this culture is like, oh wait, our elected officials work for us. Oh, that's right. Okay, so how do we engage with this process now? Okay, that's good. So really giving people the tools to do that. So if you are interested in doing that, go to our website, decriminalizenature.org, or our Instagram at decriminalizenature.
Awesome.
Yep. And if you want to donate to any of those, we'd be happy to take donations as well. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.